Hello there. As you can see, this isn't my usual style of video, but for this two-parter I thought I would try something new. And I filmed this already, hated everything about how it came across, mainly because I was holding back too much, so I decided screw it, and here we are now. No fucks given and ready to roast. In this part I'll be examining the game and why I believe it's inherently flawed and will never be released. Additionally, I'll be looking at the Patreon for the game and why I believe that this is an alleged scam. I have to use the magic A word because I do not want to get in any legal trouble. If you are here hoping I'll roast Yandere Dev and let him verbally have it, there may be some slight cooking, but I'm saving all that up for part 2. If you can't wait, subscribe and click on that notification bell so you can get alerted for when part 2 comes out. Now with all that being said, let's begin. So I don't feel like I need to talk extensively about the code, mainly because other content creators have covered this way better than I could ever do so. But I do feel like it continually needs to be highlighted, mainly because the code is an actual abomination that has been spat out from hell. For those of you who don't know or have been living under a rock, the game's code could rival that of a Victor Hugo novel with how much unnecessary twaddle is inserted into every conceivable nook and cranny. My laptop, now rest in peace, was screaming every time I would try and load the game, and God forbid I take one step forward, I'd get a 5-second lag on a good day and the whole game would implode on a bad day. And before anyone comes into the comments saying, well, Yandere Dev uses switch cases now, see, he said so on a blog post. Listen, the problem isn't just limited to the fact that the majority of his code has been written using else-if statements and it can just be fixed using switch cases. It's the fact that Yandere Dev has been immensely reluctant to receive any critique about his code unless it is padded with so many compliments and arse pats. Furthermore, Yandere Dev has admitted he has no formal education in coding, which is fine because we all have to start somewhere and going to university and getting a formal degree isn't always a viable option. But you would think that he would take all the help he can get and admit that he does need guidance within certain features that would aid in gameplay. An example of this is the save and load function. Oh wait, that doesn't exist. Seriously, after 6 years of development you can't even save the damn game because Yandere Dev doesn't know how to code it appropriately. Many people have commented something along the lines of, if the code was more streamlined then the game would run smoother, the frame rate would improve significantly, and there would be less bugs and glitches to deal with when implementing new features. And I'm inclined to agree with them, mainly because I'm not a game developer or a programmer and I'll never pretend to be. And even if you do just a little bit of research, you can see that a streamlined code in whatever respective language can help with optimization. This isn't complex, this is just common sense. This section is probably going to take up the majority of the video, mainly because I feel as though people have alluded to this, but never outright said this point. The game has no actual identity. Let me explain what I mean though. The developer is a bit like a magpie in which he goes around various video games that he likes, sees something and thinks, hey, that would look pretty cool if that was in my game, copies the basic premise, takes it back to his hoard, and strings together some shoddy explanation as to how it links to the game and why it'll help with world building, or it'll make it more interesting to the player. But this fails on so many levels. Honestly, Yandere Simulator needs to stop trying to be other video games and actually work out what it wants to be. Is it a stealth game? Is it wacky comedy with absurdist elements, dark romance, plot-led, gameplay-led, have generic NPCs like in Hitman or a rich and colourful cast like in Undertale? Is it set in Japan or some kind of hyper-reality out of an anime? Does it meet or subvert stereotypes? Is this a serious game or is this a joke game? Who the hell even knows, because I don't have a fucking clue. Interestingly enough, Yandere Dev actually covered this in a video after he proposed changing the title from Yandere Simulator to Lovesick. To summarise that video, he says he wants the game to have 2 modes. One being the game that we have now, a forever sandbox demo, and the other being a super serious adult edgy type of game. But why? Seriously though, why not just leave Yandere Simulator as it is and leave it as a meme-tacular game where people can mess around and have fun with it, close that door and start afresh with Lovesick and say it was inspired by Yandere Simulator? The tone would be set from the beginning and there would not be a confusion as to whether or not it is suitable for children. Lovesick would be an established adult game covering mature topics with a somewhat romantic subplot, but at its core it is a stealth game. Like seriously, why did no one have this discussion with the developer? Adding on to the identity of the game, let's talk about the actual design features. Many people have grievances with the art style, or lack thereof, and how all the characters essentially look the same. In short, the game lacks style. When you look at all the characters, they may have varying hairstyles or a few more accessories, but they all look generic and lack individuality. Now, some may argue that this is just the current style of the game and that Yandere Dev has mentioned on a myriad of occasions that the game will undergo some kind of artistic renaissance and the style will change. But when is that going to happen? Also, in certain new builds of the game, there have been assets added in what I believe is an attempt to try and make the world look fuller and richer, but they just look so out of place because they do not fit in with the typical cutesy style that the game has become accustomed to. Some of them actually just look really fucking ugly. So whilst it does look more developed in terms of setting, it actually just looks really disjointed and lacks cohesion. Also, something very interesting to note about the assets is that Yandere Dev has gotten a little bit of flack in recent years for stealing assets from either other games or not receiving permission from the artist. The most infamous example I can think of is the stealing of the grass texture. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is where all of this, new build came from, if he actually stole them from various other games, or if they've just been acquired through the Unity store. Now here's the section where I put the game under a microscope and tear it to shreds, but hey, at least that's admitting what I'm doing in this section. The dialogue or lack thereof takes away from the immersion of the game and is something that should really be focused on. The characters don't have any discernible personalities and look pretty damn lifeless. Too generic, just a bunch of self-insert students with a potential few exceptions. The Yakuza is one of the most ham-fisted ideas in the game, and is only there because Yandere Dev thought it'd be cool to have the Japanese mafia included. When he originally pitched this idea, he said you would do favours for the members of the Yakuza and provide them with students to use for organ harvesting or human trafficking. Overall, this was done in poor taste as you're literally harvesting your classmates, some of which are children. The delinquents are laughable, especially their damn walk cycle. I'm sorry, I hate it. Their walk cycle is the worst thing I've ever seen in my whole life. Rivalry is one of the worst decisions Yandere Dev has made for the simplest/easiest rival. And again, why was she even necessary? Why does the easiest to eliminate rival have a personal bodyguard that is basically indestructible? The amount of Easter eggs are an absolute joke. Personally, I think he continues to include them in the game so that they have relevancy to pop culture or reference popular anime or other video games. But it's just a waste of time and it glitches out the whole game. Like seriously, what's even the point of Titan mode? It looks dumb and I don't want giant naked people waddling around the place. Also, this next one is really petty, but the damn photography club. Like, I cannot. Look at some of those names and look at how crusty they are. He dead ass ripped off Scooby-Doo. You know what? I hope Warner Brothers doesn't catch wind of this. The sad part is that this was one of the many hyped up features that I was looking forward to, and I was so disappointed when it came out. The concept, amazing. The execution, horrendous. There are probably a few others that I've missed out, but you kind of get the idea. I have a lot of issues with this game. Okay, let's talk about the rivals. Whilst I think most of the rivals are fine or appropriate and could make for interesting story arcs in the game, I have a few issues with 3 rivals in particular. The nurse, the teacher, and his little sister. So the nurse and the teacher are in one category as they are both adults and faculty staff members, and Senpai's sister is in a whole other separate mess that I'll get back to in a second. If I need to be the one to tell you this, then please log off the internet and yeet your computer into the sun. Students and faculty staff relationships are not okay. They're ethically wrong. Senpai may be 18 in the game, but he's still a student and the staff have a duty of care and they still need to teach their students. Often relationships like this, also known as forbidden love, are romanticized in Wattpad fanfiction by some kids who don't really understand the implications of a child getting into a relationship with an adult, but go off Yandere Dev. Some people also suspect that Yandere Dev has purposely made Senpai 18 years old as to not to conflict with this issue, which still doesn't really absolve the ethical dilemma, but let's pretend that that is okay for a second. This would then make the nurse rival okay, but the teacher is in a whole other different situation. To which I hear you ask why? Well, let me just go and read her character description, which is on the official website. Mida is a substitute teacher who absolutely loves her job. There is nothing that she enjoys more than having dozens of eyes directed towards her, especially if those eyes belong to teenage boys. Mida will appear at school in the 7th week of gameplay in order to fill in for an unavailable teacher. She will quickly begin hunting for new prey, and Senpai will catch her attention. Her hobby is seducing schoolboys, and so far, no man has ever been able to resist her charms. If she decides that she wants someone, they have no hopes of escape. Senpai won't be able to escape her clutches unless someone takes drastic measures. Are you shitting me? Yandere Dev, you complete cretin, you've literally written a predator into your game. Likes to look at teenage boys, her hobby is seducing schoolboys? Are you okay, sir? But it only gets worse when you go over to the official wiki page and see that Ayano, aka Yan-chan, can matchmake her with another student. In short, this game allows for teacher-student relationships, and some of the characters are under the age of 18. Now, let's talk about his little sister. Yandere Dev has stated that this is not intended to be a romantic rival, rather than one of an overprotective sibling who looks out for her brother. However, there's a wee problem with this. Since this game likes to draw from stereotypes from anime and manga, one very gross aspect is that there is an underground liking for incest. Now, am I saying that Yandere Dev likes incest? No, I'm not. What I am saying is that this rival is in poor taste and, to be perfectly honest, shouldn't even be a rival. Maybe an obstacle, or maybe not even included in the game at all. Overall, I feel as though these particular rivals have been put into the game to pander and appeal to people with certain perversions rather than contributing effectively to gameplay. This is gross, and why the fuck would you do this? It's unnecessary, and the game would be fine without them. Stop being a pervert. Oh boy, let's talk about this mess. So Yandere Simulator decided to collab with Project Cutie, a free-to-play Android game which uses puzzles and RPG elements to level up your heroes with a distinct lack of clothing? Basically, it's a hentai game. The collaboration was announced in December of last year with a poll asking fans which characters they'd like to see in the game. In the same blog post, Yandere Dev clearly states that once again, Yandere Simulator is not intended for children and is an adult game. More on this later. He also states that he aims for this game to have an M rating and that most of his fan base are adults, linking to a YouTube analytics of age chart. Again, I'll be coming back to this. Now, I know what some of you are going to ask. Fringey, why oh why did Yandere Simulator decide to collab with this game? And the answer is really fucking simple. The developer is a creep. Not only is the game highly sexualized, with anime waifus any incel would drool over and boo physics that have quite frankly gone out the window, there is a massive problem that people continue to overlook, which is the characters, Ayano and Info-chan, are actually underage. Now, there is a warning at the beginning of the game saying that everyone depicted here is 18. However, one may not necessarily make that assumption instantly, because again, in Yandere Simulator, both Ayano and Info-chan are 17. It even says so on their official wiki pages. And before anyone says, but Fringey, there's a disclaimer, there's no problem. They're still based on underage girls. People will have a problem with this, and I believe, and so do many others, that that warning was only put in place to cover both developers' asses in case anyone does want to voice their disgust. Also, another point that I think is quite interesting is that both Info-chan and Ayano wear school uniforms that are meant to be for young girls between the ages of 13 to 15. Again, it's hypersexualization of Japanese schoolgirls. Yandere Dev really does have a galaxy brain. This whole situation is a PR nightmare. I saw a comment somewhere online, probably in one of the comments under a blog post, of someone stating how this is a good move for Yandere Simulator, as people will begin to associate the game with an adult crowd, rather than with children. Yeah, adults who play sex games, I'm sorry, isn't Yandere Simulator, Lovesick, supposed to be a serious stealth RPG type of game? Other than the player is hopefully the correct age, how does this make it an adult game? How is this association all of a sudden adult? Also, if your game already has a negative association with the sexualization of Japanese high school girls, do you honestly think it is a good idea to associate with a sex game for the sake of attracting a mature audience? Oh, fuck off, the lot of you! Before we move on to the Patreon, I want to talk about the analytics of age and also bring up the Reddit page. Aforementioned, Yandere Dev linked his YouTube analytics of age in a blog post, and the graph reveals that the majority of his demographic are between the ages of 18 to 24. So, if this is true, then the game already has an adult audience, so what's the excuse of collaborating with Project Cutie? Yandere Dev, if you just want to collab with a porn game, just say so, unless you secretly know, deep down inside, that you don't have a lot of adult fans. And this is where my point comes in for this subsection. The reality is that kids lie on the internet, and frequently. I think that a number of accounts that are on YouTube and subscribe to his channel and do watch his videos are fake. Not in the sense that they've been bought, but that the kid is lying about their age. And they do so pretty much all the time to gain access to certain parts of YouTube. So before he goes and pulls this Onision by saying that most of my audience are adults anyway, I think that Yandere Dev actually knows that this isn't the case. In fact, I'm 99.9% positive of that he knows this because he interacts a lot with the Reddit page. The Yandere Simulator Reddit page has an extensive history of fairly and openly critiquing the game until Yandere Dev bought the thread for about $3,000 a few years ago, and ever since then has been heavily censoring anything that is said, to the point where the thread has now become an echo chamber. How do I know there are kids in there? I encourage you to look at some of the fan art that is submitted and tell me how old you think the artist is. Also, look at this very interesting post that I found on there. And here are a few others. This is where I have to use the magic A word and say that all this information is alleged and should not be taken as fact. Yandere Simulator's Patreon page is a fucking scam. How? Let me explain. The Patreon was set up on November of 2014, but records of Patreon members only go as far back as April 2015. If there is any record of donations before April 2015, then I cannot find it or I don't have access to it. Anyway, after the game gained popularity from famous Let's Players doing videos on Yandere Simulator, you notice a distinct jump in the amount of money that the game received. It goes up and down as the years go by, but remains a steady source of income. Until November 2018, when the infamous Hate and Shame video was released. This video was one of the many mistakes Yandere Dev made throughout his developing career, but I will be saving my thoughts on that for part 2. After that, people pulled out in their masses, and the once moderately successful Patreon is now nearly under $2,000. Over the years, Yandere Dev has managed to acquire large sums of money from fans to use towards improving the game. He details how the money is being spent and who it goes to in his yearly transparency posts, but the contents of these posts are very interesting. Within them, he has given himself a very generous wage of $3,500 a month, and anything else to go towards the game, or paying for assets or voice acting, or for help. However, Yandere Dev has stated that should the Patreon money go below a certain amount, then the game will be backbenched to being a hobby rather than a main priority. Also, I think it's very interesting that in these transparency posts, he does not detail how much money he makes from YouTube or through selling merch, which should respectively go into the game and aid in development, but he doesn't. So what are you hiding, Yandere Dev? Also, in certain posts, he has detailed how he has enough money to hire an experienced programmer for a month, but has also detailed the anxieties of working with another developer, which, to be perfectly honest, is poppycock, as it's been 6 years and the game is nowhere near being complete, and is still at a demo stage, and he still wants to do a Kickstarter for the game. Bruh. You have acquired over $5,000 some month, and you still want to ask people for more money? Even if the average was $2,000 a month for 6 years, you have made nearly $150,000 from this, and the game is still nowhere near completion. It's a fucking joke. The reason why this pisses me off so much is that I believe Yandere Dev is taking money from his young fan base by baiting them with the promise of new content and Osana is nearly complete, just to keep their wallets open for him. Most kids nowadays have a debit card or a credit card that their parents put money onto, and since many kids don't know the true value of money, they could very well be supporting him on Patreon. For example, if you give him $10 a month for the past 6 years, you have given that man $720. You can buy New Horizons 14 times and still have money left over to buy something else. My closing point for this section is that Yandere Dev is very aware that he has child fans, and I believe that he takes advantage of their naivety in order to retain a steady cash flow. This is just sad, as clearly he has enough money to hire more than enough help, but chooses not to, and now people have wasted money on a game that will never come out. If you are someone that has been supporting Yandere Dev on Patreon regardless of your age, please stop giving him your money. He doesn't deserve it and hasn't, in my opinion, worked hard enough for it. Use that money for something special or save up for a cool new game that will actually be released soon. Please be careful of alleged scammers in the future. Whilst I do think the game does have some merits, and with help it could even be a decent game, in its current state, it is shambolic. The game is too inflated, the characters are too bland, the art style is generic, adult fiends are ham-fisted into the game and have not been handled with the level of sensitivity it deserves, the core mechanics are practically non-existent, and the developer is a complete cretin. Overall, I think Yandere Dev has big sky thinking, had access to a large budget, but very little skills and means to achieve. In short, this game will never be finished. Anyway, thank you very much for sticking around with me and listening to me rant. I hope you liked it, and if you did, like, share and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!